Hey CW Apes, Mr. Kennedy here, and this is your lecture on population growth from Chapter 8, Section 1 through Section 3. Today what we're going to do is take a look at factors that influence population growth. You know, how fast it grows, how big it can ultimately become, things that might slow its growth or maybe cause it to decline and disappear. Doesn't matter if we're talking about humans, cats, dogs, fish, frogs, or anything else in between. We're looking for trends that influence a population's growth or lack thereof. To start things off, I want to define a few things for you. We're going to start with the definition of the word population ecology. Population ecology is the study of populations and why their numbers change over time. Realistically, this is a vital piece of information for not just ecologists, but even environmental scientists. If a population should be growing but isn't, we want to know why. If a population is growing really, really fast, then we also want to know why. All of this gives us good information to work with as we plan for the future. If we're just talking about people, population ecology, and ultimately what we'll later call demographic studies, can help us plan for everything from, new police and fire stations to, mini malls and schools. Like, where are we going to put the next one? So knowing what's going on with populations is a very, very important thing when it comes to environmental science. What is a population? Well, you might remember that from a past lecture. If not, now's your chance. A population is a group of individuals of the same species living in the same geographic area at the same time. Now, keep in mind that there is no maximum or minimum on the word population. So you can have a population as, small as, 5 individuals, or you could be as big as 5 billion individuals. It's really just a measure of how many individuals of a species that you have living in one area at one time, okay? Now, when we think about population, one of the things that's really important for us to take into consideration is the idea of population density. So large populations, small populations, that's great, but one of the factors that is going to immediately influence whether a population is going to grow is how tightly packed those individuals are in space. So population density is the number of individuals of a species per unit area at a given time. So you could think of it as just like taking the number of individuals you have and dividing it by the area that they're in. In this example, we've got 1,400 caribou per square mile, or 3 polar bears per square mile. The population density of caribou is much, much higher than the population density of polar bears. And there's lots of ways we could measure this. We can, use satellite data. We could physically go out in the field and literally do a head count, right? Just to kind of give you an idea, one thing that we've done for people is using satellite information. We've taken pictures of North America and other parts of the world, and just based on lights from cities, we can kind of get an idea of how dense or sparse our population is, and how it's spread across the United States. So this is North America, and you can see here over on the East Coast, lots and lots of bright lights around big cities like New York City and stuff like that. And over here on the West Coast, right, LA, San Diego, lots and lots of bright lights in those areas. Then you get out here, to places like the Dakotas, okay, the Rocky Mountains themselves, and it's not as brightly lit. There's fewer people there. If you're a student of geography, then you probably know what this big dark spot down here in South America is and why it's so dark up here in the upper reaches of Canada, okay? So using light information, we could kind of get a feel for how our populations, again, are distributed in space. When you think about population, growth or change over time, one of the things that I want you to be familiar with is a survivorship curve. There are 3 different types of survivorship curves that map out the proportion of a population to survive to a specific age, or in this case, a breeding age. In a type 1 curve, our survival decreases as we get older. So basically, you could kind of think of animals like us, maybe. We have a very high probability of surviving during our youth, but as we get older, there's a limit to how long we can live. Type 2, their survival doesn't change with age. It's kind of like 50-50 every day, okay? And then type 3, your survival actually increases with age, which kind of means that you're young. Well, they don't really have very good like odds of surviving as a baby, but the older they get, then kind of like the better things, become for them. Here's a graph with some examples of individuals on it that I want you to remember. That type 1 individual, I've got the rhino up there, but again, it could be things like elephants or even people. And then the type 2, birds. Birds are a great example of a type 2. It really doesn't matter, what day of the week it is. It's kind of like the bird always has pretty much the same odds of surviving and making it through the day and seeing tomorrow. And then the sea turtle as a type 3. So if you know anything about sea turtles, they'll go lay like 300 eggs on the beach, and then mom like leaves them there, and then it's up to the little ones to find their way to the water. And if there's 300 eggs in a nest, maybe 3 of them actually survive to adulthood. And as they get older, their odds, of surviving are better. When you think about reproductive strategies, there are a couple of other terms that are thrown at you on this particular slide: R strategists and K strategists. K strategists produce few offspring. They give their offspring lots of parental care, and subsequently those offspring have a very high probability of survival. K strategists are like us and the rhino and elephants and things like that. We put a huge amount of effort in taking care of our young, which kind of guarantees or at least increases the likelihood that the young will make it to adulthood. Our strategists are the opposite. So basically they have lots of babies, and it's just the sheer number of babies they have at any one time that, makes it possible for the species to continue, because mom's not around when the babies are born, and it's up to them to figure it out. Okay. Now, change in population size. When you think about change in population size, one of the most obvious things or easiest things for us to talk about when we think about change in population size is that when babies are born, that adds to, the numbers of individuals in a population. And when, individuals die, then that takes them away. Okay, so that's kind of like a no-brainer. Births increase populations, death decreases population. We also have to think about immigration and emigration. Immigration with an I would be new individuals coming into an area and joining a population. And keep in mind, they have to be the same species. So if here I am, in Fresno, and I don't know, like a herd of, wild elephants decide to move into Fresno, that does not increase like the human population of Fresno. They're not the same species. Okay. Emigration is individuals leaving. Okay. So, if again, we're talking about the same species. Like if Mr. Kennedy decides I'm fed up with Fresno and I move, okay, that actually does bring the population of Fresno down, because I'm a human and we're talking about humans. And if I leave, then there's less of me, right? There's actually a mathematical formula that we use to calculate population change. And here it is. Your growth rate, or R, is equal to your birth rate minus your death rate plus your immigration rate minus your emigration rate. And we divide all of that by 10, and that will give us a rate of change in our population. Okay, so anytime you're doing a math problem, right, you should be able to plug those numbers in and calculate them just like this. If you have a town of 1,000 people and they experience 16 births and 12 deaths, what's the annual rate of growth? Well, births minus deaths plus immigration minus emigration divided by 10. You didn't get any emigration information, so you're going to have to live with births minus deaths here. So it's 16 minus 12, and you divide that by 10, and your annual rate of growth is 0.4%. Okay. A town of 20,000 people experienced a birth rate of 48, death rate of 18. Immigration and emigration were 12 and 3 respectively. What's their change? Well, you can see it plugged in there. 48 minus 18 plus 12 minus 3. Divide that by 10, and lo, we get a change of 3.9%. Okay? Now, there's all kinds of things that can affect if a population is going to grow, decline, if it's going to grow fast, grow slow. We refer to those as limiting factors. okay? And I've talked about these in past lectures, so hopefully you remember them. There's two grand divisions of limiting factors that I've mentioned in the past: density dependent and density independent factors. So if it's a density dependent factor, then that affects the population more as the density increases. And if it's density independent, then we don't care how many individuals are in the population, the impact is always going to be the same. So I've got some examples down here in the bottom and some arrows pointing to which side they belong to, right? Predation is a density dependent factor because, you know, like the more dense the population of predators gets, like the more impact it's going to have, right? Killing frost, man, it doesn't care how big your population is. If it's cold and there's frost on the ground, I mean, you could have one plant or a billion plants. It's going to kill them all, right? These density dependent and density independent factors even influence you on your choice and where you want to live. Some of you are probably sitting there watching this video going, you know, man, when I'm old enough, I am so moving out of this town. Okay, well, why? And a lot of people go, well, it's too dang hot in the Central Valley. Well, if you're going to tell me it's too hot in the Central Valley and you don't want to live in the Central Valley because it's hot, that's a density independent factor. It doesn't matter if there's 5 people in the Central Valley or 5 million people in the Central Valley. If it's 110, it's hot and we don't want to be here, right? So yeah, that's how those factors play out. There's all kinds of other factors to consider for lower life forms, but that's just one for us. All right, population distribution. Again, you might remember me talking about this in the past. Populations will distribute themselves throughout an ecosystem in accordance with resource availability and competition for those resources. So in terms of population distribution, there's 3 basic patterns that we've talked about in the past, so I'm going to remind you of them here: clumped, uniform, and random distributions. In clumped distributions, your resources are patchy, so the population tends to seek out or go look for those patchy resources and cluster around them. One of the things that I always like to ask students is like, why is Fresno where Fresno is? Like, why not 20 miles to the east or 20 miles to the north or 20 miles to the south? Like, why is it here? Well, if you know anything about Fresno, you probably know that Fresno sits right on the San Joaquin River. And at one time, the San Joaquin River was a lifeline for agriculture in this area and industry. So, like, why not build Fresno right here on the San Joaquin River? Okay. If you study the map of the United States, you will find numerous examples of cities that are built like right next to water because of the importance of that water. So that's a clump distribution. Random distribution. Your resources are kind of unpredictable. So, you know, you could kind of be anywhere, anytime, and the organisms do not interact much with one another. Like, there's no territoriality or anything like that that keeps one group, you know, away from another group. So it's super unpredictable, and you could pretty much be anywhere, anytime. Uniform, this is usually a territorial type distribution in nature where things are evenly spaced out. Like, you know, in the case of these penguin, they're fighting for space to like nest on the ice. So organisms compete for space, they compete for other resources, and you know that causes them to develop this uniform you know, distribution in the environment. Okay. The other thing that's important for population growth is the population sex ratio, or basically the ratio of males to females. Worldwide, there are currently about 101 males to 100 females, so there's slightly more males than females. The reason this becomes important is because at the end of the day, the female of any species is really the only individual that can make more of that species. So if you have an unusually skewed sex ratio towards the male gender, then the population will probably grow very, very slowly, if at all, okay? Because you need the female in order to, you know, add to the population. The age structure is also important. If we're talking about humans, right, there is an age within which humans can reproduce, and then outside of which they cannot, right, which becomes an important delineating factor and again, how fast your population will grow or decline. If you have a population that is, well, heavily skewed or loaded with individuals who are reproductively capable, well, then if your population isn't growing fast, you at least have the potential to grow fast. If your population is heavily skewed to individuals that are outside those reproductively capable years, then again, your population probably will not grow, or if it is growing, it's growing incredibly slowly. Chances are it's probably declining. So there's three different population or demographic diagrams that you have shown here on this slide to kind of illustrate those points. So if you look closely, you can see these are talking about people and the ratio of males to females and the number of individuals that are basically reproductively capable on each of these graphs is charted. And as you look close, as you have a large number of individuals that are reproductively capable, then they can have lots and lots of babies, which leads to fast population growth, which is what you're experiencing here in this Nigeria graph. The bad part about the Nigeria graph is the tiny, tiny top end, which basically means, yeah, the population is growing fast, but the people aren't exactly living long, healthy lives, okay? The United States is experiencing slow growth, so this is kind of like saying, okay, on average, every couple that is reproductively capable is having, and this is actually a true statistic in the United States, we're having just about like I think the average, the last I looked was like 2.1, 2.2 kids per family if you like multiplied it all out across the United States. And the interesting thing about that is in order to replace the parents, they need, basically the family needs to have 2 kids. If you have 3 kids, 4 kids, and so on, then you've had enough kids to replace the parents when they pass and then add to the overall population size. If you have less than 2 kids, then when the parents in that situation pass, you have negative population growth, which is a fancy way of saying the population size will go down, okay? So in the case of Germany, that's what we're seeing here, okay? And there's, again, all kinds of reasons why a population might be growing fast, slow, somewhere in between. When it comes to people, and we'll explore this in latter videos, there are some interesting trends in people where there is healthcare, where there is education and affluence, then basically populations tend to grow more slowly than the opposite scenario, no healthcare, no education, and abject poverty, okay? So it's an interesting kind of scenario that's playing out in developed countries like what you're seeing there in Germany and even here in the United States. A true statistic that's out there is that in the US, people are waiting longer to have children and having fewer children than ever before in our nation's history. All right, so what kind of growth are we going to see as our populations grow? Well, there's a couple of different scenarios that we could see. You're probably familiar with them from math, so I'll be quick. We could see exponential growth, or we could see like linear growth. Exponential growth, realistically, I just want you to know that this is growth that involves like faster and faster growth over shorter and shorter time periods, okay? So if we look at a graph of exponential growth, basically what's happening here is, it doesn't matter if you're looking at this table or this graph, you can see that the growth is going faster and faster and shorter time periods, giving us this J-shaped curve. J-shaped curves really are only possible if life forms reach what's referred to as their biotic potential. To give you an idea of what that means is if a female of whatever species is capable of having 1 baby a month, then biotic potential for her would be having 1 baby a month, right? And then that baby would have to survive and then reproduce. You can imagine how fast the population would grow if that were true, okay? Very few species ever reach biotic potential because of all of the other limiting factors, disease, predation, competition for resources that play out that ultimately prevent that from happening. And if we're talking about people, right, people don't even reach biotic potential because, we're, the only species on Earth that can actually plan a family size and make conscious decisions about how many children we want, right, in our families. So lower life forms don't do that. So here's a graph of those limiting factors that, again, would prevent a population from reaching its biotic potential. This one's using fish, okay? So you could see decreasing oxygen supply, right? Lower food supplies, disease, predators, all of these things will put a cap on the organism ever reaching its biotic potential. So that's very, very rare, if ever, in nature. One thing that we do see a lot when it comes to exponential growth, because lower life forms lack the human ability that I just described for you, where we can actually look at how big our family is and consciously choose whether or not we want to add to it. Lower life forms, they don't have that cognitive ability. So they will almost always overshoot the maximum number of individuals that the environment can support in a given time period. So that maximum number of individuals the population or the environment can support is called the carrying capacity. We've talked about that in other videos, but that's a very, very interesting number. Okay, it's the maximum individuals the environment can support indefinitely. That doesn't mean that once you hit carrying capacity, you go extinct. What that does mean is that, relatively speaking, births will start to be balanced out by deaths, and population growth, for all intents and purposes, will level off. Okay. Humans are not there yet. We have about 7 billion people on the surface of the earth, and our population is just going to keep right on going. But when it comes to lower life forms, they experience this all the time in healthy ecosystems. In healthy, like climax communities, like all of the populations pretty much exist at carrying capacity all the time. But understand, at carrying capacity, again, doesn't mean that everybody's dying off. What it does mean is that there's a natural like ebb and flow of population change around that line. So one year, like these caribou, they might have like, an abundance of food. So they reproduce like crazy, not thinking about, gosh, well, if we have too many baby caribou and we eat up all the food, what's going to happen next year? Nope. They just go through it and experience it. They make lots of baby caribou and whoops, now all the food's gone, so there is a die-off, okay? As a result of the die-off, then the ecosystem recovers, there's more grass, and the cycle repeats. They're not smart enough to go, ooh, you remember what happened 2 years ago? Like, let's not have that happen again. No, they just, each day is a new day for a caribou, okay? So yeah. Another thing to think about in terms of population growth is the logistical growth model. In the logistic growth, what we get is, instead of just a J-shaped curve, we get what's referred to as an S-shaped curve. So basically exponential growth followed by the rate slowing down until the population reaches K, or carrying capacity. Again, that maximum number of individuals the population can support indefinitely. When you think about that up and down I just described with the caribou, if we were to truly graph logistical growth of the caribou, this is what it would look like, right? You'd have a huge population overshoot and then these little ups and downs around carrying capacity all the time. Natural populations, they fluctuate. There's never just going to be like this flat line that says, yeah, there's always going to be 500 caribou or something. There's going to be good years for caribou. There's going to be bad years for caribou. And usually the fluctuations that we see, they impact other species, not just plants, but, remember the predator-prey relationships we've talked about before? Here we've got wolves that are eating moose, right? So if the moose population goes up, well, you can bet the wolf population is going to go up commensurately. And, both of them will probably overshoot carrying capacity, and then both their populations will come down. So these are just all factors that play into that population change. Now, I've got a challenge for you, okay? I want you to do one last little bit of math for me here and see if you can solve this problem. Calculate population density, okay? It has been stated that everyone in the United States could live comfortably inside of the state of Texas. Whoa, that's like millions of people. The 2010 population of the United States was 307 million people. Well, last I checked, it's well past 2010, so there's more of us than that now. But anyways, the area of Texas is 260,000 square miles. That's a big state, okay? Assuming the entire population of the U.S. did move to Texas, what would be the population density per mile squared? All right, gang. We're going to talk about that and more in class. I hope you've learned a little bit about population change over time. I'm Mr. Kennedy. Keep it green, and I'll see you next time.